Don't do business. That's all right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Bruce Warner, the president of the Trimet board. I want to welcome everybody to this morning's briefing, not meeting, no action items today. We have a full agenda, tight schedule, and we've got a lot to go through. We have one board member that will be, or a couple board members, I think he'll be coming late here, so we'll get started right away here. So with that, Neil, do you want to start this up?
Yeah, of course, I wanted to address what you all walked through here. And we found out very early this morning that ATU 757 went on strike against First Transit, affecting 2 of our lift operations bases. So what that means for our lift customers is that we put the service on life-sustaining trips, are prioritized. We'll do everything else we can through our one lift base, which is non-union, and our contracted service with taxis and other services. So we'll provide all the rides we possibly can, but only the life-sustaining rides are guaranteed at this point in time. You know the background to some extent of this, but I wanted to just emphasize very clearly that this is a dispute between ATU 757 and First Transit. First Transit is an independent contractor who works for us. They're a for-profit firm that does this all over the country. The contract between ATU 757 is with First Transit. It's those 2 parties that have to get together to resolve this issue. I wanted to address, because in the news media, of course, the ATU is, I think, doing a disservice to the public by beginning to say that there is something that Trimet can do about this right now, other than urge the parties to negotiate and come to an agreement, and particularly it has to do with the phrase of 13C, and I wanted Janet Tran to take just a couple moments to explain that to you and why it doesn't apply in this situation.
Yes, just briefly, 13C, if you want me to come up here, please hear me okay. 13C is part of a federal statute that was adopted in 1964. And the purpose of the statute was when private transportation companies were being taken over by public entities, there were federal dollars involved. And so the statute prohibits federal money from displacing either collective bargaining agreements that exist or from using federal money to worsen employment conditions. Now, neither of those that take place here, because what we have is a contract with a third party and the ATU. So that doesn't apply. The other thing is the 13C agreement, which was agreed to between Trimet and ATU in 1980, doesn't apply here because by its terms, it doesn't apply to paratransit, which is what the First Transit issue is about. So neither statutorily or by the terms of the agreement doesn't apply.
So obviously, thank you, Janet. This is very regrettable, and we really do urge the parties to get together and solve this, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that they do get together, and that with the resources we have, we provide the most service we can to other customers. We obviously feel bad about the interruption of service for those customers.
One quick question in regards to them not applying. I mean, I don't really keep up to date on what is it, section C or 13C. 13C. I mean, it's not at the top of my reading list. Yeah. Right next to Harry Potter. But I mean, is there any brief detail you could give us as to why it doesn't apply?
Sure.
Especially the federal, the first thing that you mentioned in regards to federal dollars.
Right. So, you know, historically, what happened was private transportation companies were not able to provide transportation, and they were essentially going bankrupt. So in the 1960s, what you had is you had the federal government coming in, bringing federal dollars, and essentially helping local governmental entities take over these transportation districts. What they were concerned about is by having these new entities come in, they would displace the existing private contracts that were between the private transportation providers and the existing unions. So the goal was to not take federal money and create worsened job conditions for represented workers. So that's the purpose of the act, and that has survived all of these years. So when we get grants, federal grants, we agree to this 13C, and interestingly, that's not even the name of the actual citation. It's such an old provision that they still call it 13C, even though the statutes have been modernized. But in any event, when we get federal money, we essentially, along with the union, agree that we won't create conditions with federal money that worsen the working conditions for employees. Now, that agreement is specific, and it has provisions in it about how it applies. What the ATU has contended is that there is an arbitration clause in there that compels arbitration, among other things. But that's essentially what they're focused on. But also within the agreement, the terms of the agreement, so in other words, the ATU agreed that the 13C agreement doesn't apply to paratransit operations. So you have, basically it's twofold. Number one, the statute by its terms don't apply here. And number two, even if you could make the argument that the statute applies, the agreement doesn't apply by its own terms. Is that?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. We're not done, okay?
No, we're done with that.
Okay,
So what I was
all right.
going to do is run on to sort of the normal briefing
All right,
topic
good.
that we have planned and ask Dan Blocker to come up. We wanted to give you a little bit more detail about the Port Milwaukee project. We have some very important activities and some board actions related to contracting that will be coming to your June meeting, June 27th meeting. And I wanted to make sure that you had a good grounding of where the project stands before you took those actions. So Dan.
Good morning. Board President, members of the board. I'm here this morning to just give you a very brief overview of the status of the Port Milwaukee project. I'll try to get us caught up here in time. And what I really want to do is tell you a little bit about where we are in terms of progress, how we're doing with our right-of-way program. In the previous meeting, you asked for a little bit of an update on our contingency utilization, so we have some information on that as well. Starting with a brief overview of the project, I'm not going to go through this in detail just for the sake of time. I think you're all pretty familiar with the project. So moving ahead, let's talk about where we are in financial status. So far, we have in our project account $390.7 million. That's been our working money as we've gone through the project thus far, covering our PE, our final engineering, and the initial bits of construction that we've already gotten underway through your authorization. So far, as of the end of April, we have committed contracts of $409 million. Now, even though that's above, that's not all work out the door. That's just where we are in terms of total contracting today. We have expended through the end of April just under $250 million. You can see our cash balance is still looking good. And our cash balance is going to get better real soon. We are in the final stages of getting our full funding grant agreement. FTA Administrator Rogoff is planning to be here, currently scheduled to be here on the 22nd for the official note of the FFGA. So stay tuned for further updates about that. But I believe that date is now going to be fixed. We're still coordinating with FTA headquarters. So with the FFGA, that basically releases the rest of the money in the account. There you see the $390 million of cash we have. All of the other funding is linked to receipt of the FFGA. So with that in hand, we can start to draw down on the rest of the local funds. The FFGA does not give us all the money at once. We'll get a first-year installment of $85 million, and then that will be spread out over the rest of the years in accordance with the terms of the FFGA. So we'll be mindful, of course, of cash flow. We have the ability to bond against the future FFGA dollars, as you've seen in Beth's previous recommendations. So our cash balance is good. Just a little bit about where we are in terms of getting the project underway. So far, we've had 208 firms participate in this project. Most of them have been on the design side, although we are ramping up on the construction side as well. 74 of those firms are DVDs. We predicted we would have 14,500 total jobs created as a part of the project. About half of them are direct jobs in the construction and engineering trades. The rest are indirect and induced. And there's our current count as of today. Go back in that, Rob. So we have 1,300 direct jobs already underway, and then the indirect jobs are based on a pro rata of the original estimate. And those jobs come from all of the suppliers and things around the region and around the country who participate in the project. We're also tracking our workforce diversity. So we have 491 jobs strictly on the construction side, and that's what these workforce diversity numbers are involved in. As you can see on the bottom there, 82,000 hours as of April 10th. In fact, we had about 16,000 hours in March alone. So we are starting to see those job hours increasing every month. 22% of those hours have been to people of color, 5% to women, and about 16% to apprentices. So I think those are good numbers that reflect the region and the workforce. Real briefly, a little bit of progress stuff. This slide shows the three primary parts of the project. We have the west side from the end of the mall terminus near PSU, runs down through a structure and connects to the new bridge and then the new bridge project. That part of the project is under the direction of Rob Bernard, who's back here helping me with the slides. And then we have the east side of the project that runs from around OMSI all the way down to Park Avenue and Oak Grove. That's under the direction of Leah Robbins, who's back there as well. So if you have detailed questions, ask the experts. Starting with the west, this is a slide image of what Lincoln Street will look like when we're completed. And looking at it today, obviously not quite there. But a lot of orange cones and flaggers, and this is a shot looking down Lincoln Street toward the east from at the terminus end. That cafe there has now been demolished, and a lot of work going on down here for advanced utilities, which you authorized under some initial work scopes as part of that project. Also, as part of that is this is a rendering of the elevated structure that will go across NATO and Harbor Drive, leading down into South Waterfront. A lot of this work is already underway. These piers are under construction, and all this steel is under fabrication already. So what it looks like today, this is where the crane was preparing to do some drilled shaft work for those bridge piers. And now some of those piers are visible. If you go down there today, you can see the footings and columns and caps coming up out of there. Jumping ahead to the bridge, we've got a nice slide here. If you're someday in a hot air balloon up over OMSI, that's the bridge that you'll see. A little bit of work left to do before we get that, but we're well on the way to creating it. So this is a rendering of the shaft, or the tower that we're doing on the west side. We start by, you can't see on the slide, but there are these 6 deep shafts that are down in the river bottom, and those have been completed. That was basically in the November to February timeframe. We completed those. Very challenging work. This is a shot of them using a concrete pumper to actually fill one of those shafts. But those are all done and behind us now. The next thing that happens is pour this extremely large pile cap, a huge concrete pour. And what that does is serves as essentially as the tabletop to hold those 6 shafts together and provide the foundation upon which we build. And lots and lots of reinforcing steel went into there. These are the forms that the concrete is placed against. These are the reinforcing bars coming out of the drilled shafts. This is the first layer of reinforcing that went into that cap. That's now been poured. So this slide shows the concrete cap already completed. And now we see, spoiler alert, this is the cower coming up out of that shaft. So on the next slide, you can see that that's the reinforcing steel for these parts of the legs coming out of the tower. And there's another shot of this tower construction. Just yesterday, we made the first starter floor on one of these. So moving along there. On the east side, really just getting started there. Haven't done a whole lot of work there, but now getting ready to ramp that up. We have already started some building demolition work. We're also doing some utility work. This is a deep excavation near Powell for a sewer. And we're also doing some track work for the Oregon Pacific Railroad. We're rearranging those facilities. We were a member authorizing those contracts to vacate several months ago. Talk a little bit about where we are in our right-of-way acquisition program. This is a very big part of the overall project. A total of 196 acquisitions are now planned. 51 of those are full acquisitions. 145 are either partial acquisitions, slivers and corners of properties, or temporary construction easements. Some of the properties actually have both of those. And then amongst all of those, we have 109 relocations to do. Some of them are multiple relocations from one property. Many of the properties have many relocations. So that's just a brief insight into the program. Those numbers increased from the time we initially did our environmental impact statement. Primarily the reason that those increased, there's always some design details that changes the edges that we assume we need, particularly as it relates to construction easements. But we also had a change from the railroad where they asked for more offset between the freight and the light rail line. That impacted a number of properties. Around the stations, we had some changes. And then from going through our permitting process with the local jurisdiction, that also sort of pushed our footprint out in certain places. So the number of properties have increased somewhat. This is where we are today. We had 6 properties that were being donated as in-kind, and so we have those properties in hand now. It's a pretty big amount of money, $43.6 million. We have 34 properties that we've already acquired. That's another $38 million. We have 53 properties that we have outstanding offers on. Now, the significance of all that is it's really helping us get a good handle on our costs. As you can see in that last bullet is the land and improvements that are not already in acquisition are believed to be about $11 million. That's our estimate. When we go through and do our appraisals, it might change a little bit, but as you can see in our total program, we have a very good understanding of the overall right-of-way costs. Our budget for this is $206 million, and that's made up of a whole bunch of components, not just the land and improvements that I just discussed, but also relocation benefits, a whole series of appraisal and file costs that we just incur in order to acquire the property, some demolition, and then finally some contingency allocated to the
That's a quick question.
Yes.
What's the percentage of properties that we're acquiring through condemnation?
Well, we don't really know that in advance. Condemnation is primarily, in our case, driven by our scheduled deeds. And so once we make an offer, again, this process is very tightly structured according to the federal rule. This is called the Uniform Act. We have to do an appraisal and have that appraisal seconded, so to speak, and then we make an offer based only on that appraisal. And we can negotiate that as long as it takes in order to reach a conclusion, unless our schedule dictates on the properties. And that's really the trigger for us to then come for condemnation. So it's hard for me to know exactly how many will be, because I don't know how many of them will be resolved quickly, and I don't know how many of them will be needed to be advanced in order to do the construction. We're going to talk a little bit more about the condemnation process here. I'm sorry I can't answer the question better,
But yeah, it is fair to say it's a small percentage, right, that actually end up going to court and getting.
it's an extremely small percentage that requires a court action. We start the condemnation process quite frequently so that we get access to the property, but we usually do negotiate them to a conclusion without having to go fully through the court process or condemnation.
If I may, so on one of the previous slides, there's an anticipation of 196 acquisitions of property. And so on the next slide, we had 6 properties that have been donated, 34 have been acquired, there are 53 outstanding offers. So that leaves about another 95 to 100 pending. Yet the value of that's only $11 million. So these are small little slivers.
I've got some stats on that here if I'm able to see.
So the majority of the work, would you say, majority of the large properties are taken care of.
They are at least appraised and offered, yes. So
So
on that slide, you see 53 had offers. Some of them may, in fact, require condemnation, depending on what our schedule requires.
So the estimated value of land and improvements not already in acquisition does not include those that are pending offers that have been presented and not accepted or yet to be determined by condemnation.
You know, the number is included in that in terms of the value of the land. But if you're
I'm looking at the last sentence and it's rather confusing if we're,
this is the value of the land only for the remaining properties not counted in there. So there's about 100 properties. But we could have to go to condemnation on any one of those. And we could have to go to condemnation on any one of
which
those.
could increase the,
Yes.
I guess I'm just suggesting that last sentence maybe misinterpreted or not understood.
There's a different slide coming later specific to the condemnation possibilities that might be able to answer your question. So we've done a cost to complete. We've made our own assessment of where this will land based on all of you know today about not only the acquisition costs but also the file costs and the relocation costs. So out of our $206 million budget, we have $195 million. We think that'll be the total cost. That leaves us $11 million left in contingency for right of way. Now, I wouldn't assume that's not going to be needed. What we're finding really is that the relocation costs are generally higher than we've been estimating. The acquisition of the land and the building costs themselves are generally a little lower, which is not a surprise in the real estate market. Relocation is the hardest thing for us to estimate because we don't get full knowledge of either what has to be relocated when we do our estimate. We also, the relocation costs are at an actual cost basis, so depending on what the business wants to do to relocate, there are sometimes more eligible costs than any going in. So far we're balancing those and staying within our budget, but until we get all those relocation costs really figured out, we won't assume this is free form. It still stays within the budget. So the board actions required to support the right-of-way program are twofold. First, each property that's over $500,000 in value has to be approved by the board, and you did that in your December 2010 authorization for acquisitions. There may be a couple additional ones that got added since we did that we'll come back on. But there shouldn't be many. And then, as you well know, you do the condemnations as well. So the condemnation process.
One other thing, my understanding that condemnation also provides some benefits to the property owner.
Absolutely.
So, and it's not in it, we do not actually have to go to condemnation, we merely have to threaten condemnation, is my understanding, and then there are tax benefits for the seller when that happens.
Condemnation is a process. We do formally enter that once you give us the authorization to do it.
But we don't have to consummate it.
That's
as a
correct. So we
condemnation.
deposit, at that point, we deposit our money with the court
Right.
based on our best offer. And that allows us then to get possession of the property and to begin our work and support our schedule while this condemnation process carries through.
My point is, it's not a totally negative thing.
That's
From
correct.
the property owner's standpoint.
That's
There are
correct.
some additional benefits that
And in
come into
fact,
play.
thanks for pointing that out. In fact, some of them we brought to you have been what we refer to as friendly condemnations, where the property owner wants access to that money. Once it's deposited in court, they can get access to that money to begin their planning and acquisition of their future location. So sometimes they actually want us to do that so they can get going, even though we haven't agreed on a fair value for the property. So in May, we want to present to you a proposed resolution where you would grant us broader condemnation authority. So in other words, we will ask you to approve condemnation of a list of the remaining properties that don't have an acquisition, that have an estimated value of less than $1 million. Now, as you were pointing out, Steve, that really is going to be the vast majority of the remaining properties. You would give the general manager authority to begin that condemnation process through this one. This is not unusual. This is often done. ODOT does this when you have a border type of project. One of the reasons that we're advocating for this, first of all, is for your workload, because we're going to have more volume of properties that we may have to go to condemnation on. They're going to be for a much smaller value. And really, once we have the FFGA, then in order to implement the project, we have to have these properties, we have to have them on the schedule we need. Now, that doesn't imply that every remaining property acquisition is going to go to condemnation. Quite unlikely, particularly as they get smaller, they become easier to settle. But we just want to have this ability to use this tool when necessary, when either us or the property owner would like to use this process. The larger ones that would remain, we would still come to you individually on. Those would be the ones that are over $1 million. There'd be about 11 of those, I think. But this is some breakdown, Steve. I think this might have been the numbers you were looking at. Potential condemnations going forward that are less than $1 million would be a total of 115 properties. 80 of those have values of less than $50,000. 29 more are in the $50,000 to $500,000 range, and then 6 are between $500,000 and $1 million. So as you can see, the majority of them are on the smaller end. 10 of them are full acquisitions, 57 of them are partial, and 48 of them have only a temporary easement. And as I mentioned, there'll be about 11 additions beyond this that we would come on an individual basis because of the value of that work, over $1 million. So that's our proposal in order to help us remain nimble and meet our schedule once the FFGA is in hand.
So I think this is an important issue in terms of the way we move forward in this work. I don't want all 80 of these coming to us in a regular agenda, as an example, or maybe 115 properties. I think what staff is asking, which I think is good, is what level feels comfortable to the board in terms of delegation. There's no question. I mean, he, is clearly at that 50,000 level, not a problem. 50 to 100,000, there may be some ones, I guess I would probably look to the staff if there's contentious things we need to look at. And I think the only question is, I look, there's a whole 6 between 500,000 and $1 million is what it looks like, right? That would be, so, I see that the break point is either $500,000 or $1 million, from my end. So I guess I look and see if any discussion or thoughts on the board could help to get the resolution together.
That's exactly right. And just sort of reiterate a little bit about what Dan said related to that question, which is this is a very structured process, and so there isn't a lot of discretion on anybody's part. Once you do the appraisals, do the review appraisals, if it's a large acquisition, a TA that has to concur in it, then we make the offers and we move along towards settlement. So it is a very structured and very guarded process with lots of different eyes on it. So I wanted to just make that point related to your responsibilities as a board.
So any thoughts or?
Yeah, just around the property owners. So they have obviously, they're part of the discussion, obviously, in terms of what this looks like. Anytime when there is an issue, then that needs to go to a different level. Or is that correct? I guess I want to know a little bit more about if there is an issue with the property owner. Yeah.
We try to negotiate with the property owner to reach a resolution. I think our track record has been really good in doing that. It's really when there's a schedule imperative that changes it to be a condemnation process rather than a continued negotiation, sometimes mediation, to get to a conclusion. We only need to use the condemnation when there's a need to have possession.
So there's no changes in the administrative process or the people's ability to contest the values and stuff, right? That's see.
So, as you said, this isn't changing the procedure or how the law is followed. It may, however, in a handful of instances, create a perception that we are not sensitive. And I imagine if we could go back to that slide, it's certainly not in the 80. And the 6 with estimated value, if we set the benchmark as 500,000, we would review those 6. That's not going to be undue for the board. The 29 may be those that, and I don't know that there are any in there, that are of a value that, or a nature that may be a single-family residence. And the perception, not the reality, is that someone whose home is being affected and may want the appearance that individuals appointed by the governor, in addition to staff, who are very sensitive and appropriate, have their quote-unquote ability and their day in court, which really, we aren't the court. The court is the condemnation court. So I guess the 29 will be only those that would have any concern to have an appearance basis of those that may be a single family residence. And I suspect we'll be talking possibly about a handful of any. We have a range of price range of 200, 500 or something like that. Are there any single family residences?
I would assume there are some. Jillian Detweiler's here. She may have some notions of
I
that.
believe there are only 2 single-family homes that we are acquiring in full that have not been settled. So there are many residential properties affected by a temporary or partial, but not that required the house for a relocation of the resident.
So what I heard you say is you're more comfortable with $500,000, but if you've got a single-family residential structure where you've got a full taking, you'd like to see those.
Yes.
I'm comfortable with that.
I would just push the conversation just a little bit, which is, I suppose, my job here. We're also balancing schedule risk for the project, which has great impact on the public in terms of the ultimate cost of the project. So what I would, accepting that recommendation, what you may see is us trying to advance those. We have to do the we've seen before to mitigate that schedule risk.
That's perfect. That's perfect.
We're just saying we're adding, in this case, we're adding 2 resolutions to what might be 1 or 2 if we broke out the 500,000. So now we're looking at 1 group 1, potentially 2 single families, that's 3, and potentially 6 with estimated value of 500,000. I mean, that shouldn't be undue in terms of where.
No, and we're not worried about our own work related to this, Rob. We're just worried about the schedule.
We're there with you.
With one board meeting a month and a busy schedule that all of you have, and making sure that we can actually achieve the acquisitions on a timely basis, because that's where the real risk is, in terms of the project schedule.
Okay, so you got some guidance there? I'm sorry, Mr. Travis?
Once the condemnation process is started, does the board touch the process at any point once it's started? So generally not. That's what I was afraid of. So once we give that blanket approval for anything less than, like Steve was saying, 500,000, then the train has left the station. Huntington.
Right, and I think, again, most of the time, we then enter into alternative disputes processes, mediation, what have you, with the owner. Sometimes that's under the auspices of the court, sometimes not. That's just independently arranged. And then if all things, and this has happened incredibly rarely in our situation, because it actually needs a trial, then that is a judicial process that has its own protections, and we live by the results.
Yeah, this is the federal process is pretty prescriptive.
Correct.
But I suspect that somebody really agrees when they hear about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then we can hear about it, but there's nothing that we can do. The process is the process. So once we give that approval,
Yeah.
it's done and it's out of our hands. So, I'm in agreement with the 500,000 and count it out on Steve May.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Okay, skip over that one and then move on. I just wanted to give you a brief insight into where we are in contract. This is a list of the major contracts that we either have awarded or that we have a 90% estimate on, like 2 big civil contracts. That in aggregate represents about 75% of the work. So again, we're in a good situation, having good knowledge of most of our costs going into the construction phase. There's about 25% that's remaining, systems contract, a few others. These you will see coming to you over the course of the summer and into the early fall. And at that point, we'll have virtually all the work under contract. So coming this month, will be a couple of contracts to advance some additional construction work. On the west segment, the downtown piece, we will be asking for your approval of the total contract price, that is the whole contract. You've given a couple bites of it over time to start the harbor structure and the early utilities. This will now wrap them in and will include them into the total contract amount. Right now, we think that's about $88 million. We're still negotiating it. We will also come for the first major piece of work on the east side, which is to begin some of the structures over there. So that's about an $80 million contract, and then you'll see that one more time for its total contract price, probably in July or August, as soon as we finish that negotiation. We've already talked about having some sort of blanket condemnation authority. We'll have clarity on what proposed for that. And finally, we have a couple small construction management on-call contracts that we want to authorize more work for those. So we have a couple of them. Last but not least, I wanted to talk a little bit about the contingency. I'll start off by explaining that the contingency for this project is something that we work together with the FTA on establishing. They have a very rigorous formal process of risk analysis that they go through with every grantee at various stages of your project, depending on its size, in order to establish what they believe are the reasonable contingency levels. And once that level is established, they are then assigned to different contingency uses. Now, you don't have to strictly use them for that, but the reason for doing that is to make sure the grantees don't pull down all the contingency early and leave not enough for the future. So that's why they sort of segment it into different pieces. So we wind up with these kind of contingencies that are established, one for right-of-way, final design requirements, so that's all the details being developed as you go through the design process. Bid and market risk, that's basically what it takes to convert it from your estimate to a fixed price. Construction risk during construction, those are all the normal things we see. That word also in change orders. And then finally, an owner's reserve, that's just kind of a strategic backstop that we manage. So if we look at the next slide. These are the levels we were at in relative terms when we started the preliminary engineering. You can see the various categories that we have there. So we have the right-of-way contingency, the final design and bid market. This basically takes us from PE through award of contract. Risk table and construction risk claims are basically three different types of construction phase risks. The risk table are basically those that we identify in advance and tell the contractor, try not to take the risk for that. Do not put money in your bid to cover that. And we establish a table in the contract that is basically a provisional sum for the contractor to draw against if in fact those risks are encountered. It's efficient for us to do it that way so that they don't just bury it in their price and then get to keep it if we manage the risk away. So we want to share in that savings. But we also don't want them to guess about what they have to cover. This one is basically change order allowance. So this is what you draw from when you approve our initial awards along with the change order allowance. We take that allowance and set it aside. It doesn't mean it's used, but it does mean it's kind of reserved for that contract. And then finally, claims is basically a reserve amount for when we can't agree with the contractor on what the value of the change order is. And some of those go all the way to a trial process, and we have to have some allowance for that. And then finally, our owner's reserve. Altogether, at the PE, these added up to about 17% of the project amount, not counting finance costs. We pull the finance costs out of these calculations because they vary so much from project to project, but the rest of the projects we're able to use our history to help guide us. This next slide then shows what we pulled down. The blue indicates how much of each of those buckets we have allocated through up to and including assumption of these two large civil contracts being awarded. So as we talked earlier, right-of-way contingency has been used. We still have the amount left. So this is about 70% of that one has been drawn down. Final design and bid market are basically right where we would expect them to be. We are nearly finished with our putting work under contract. As I mentioned before, we have about 25% left to put under contract. And aggregate, that's about 25% of those two risk items left. So we're right on track with those. risk tables. Some of this has been assigned, but very little of it has been used so far. We had a little bit of risk that we took regarding coordination of the bridge project and ZRZ remediation work and what they should assume in schedule and access. And some of it didn't go the way we told them to plan, so we drew from our risk tables to pay for that additional expense. Similarly, on the change orders, we've just begun starting to do some of them. You've seen them, and we did a change to the special track work contract as a result of Union Pacific asking us to use a different type of churn out. There have been a few other smaller ones along the way. So far, those are, as you can see, just barely begun to use. Obviously, no claims yet. And we pulled down a little bit of our owner's reserve so far, and mostly that was for scope additions that came along during the design phase. Not sort of the routine things of details emerging, but rather some larger pieces of work that got added, mostly permit requirements. We agreed to do some additional work related to the streetcar and the approaches to the bridges. We were asked to do some additional architectural enhancements to the Kellogg Bridge down in Milwaukee, which we agreed to do, and actually got a permit. We've seen on the Moody project, which we crossed down the South Waterfront, some settlement that project is occurring, so we basically mitigated that risk for ourselves with an additional cost. And then Union Pacific made a change that had some impacts on the cost of the work through the Clinton Station areas. Those were the big ones. And we took them out of owner's reserve simply because they're not sort of the routine change that we would expect and expect to have funded under this one year. So if we look at this all together, the remaining red represents about 11% contract without the finance costs. Put that in context. That's actually a pretty good level. I mean, it's not, we have a lot of risk on these projects, a lot of underground work, structures, a lot of right-of-way acquisition to get. But we're comfortable with that level. For comparison, at this same point in the project on Interstate Max, there was 10% contingency going forward there. For South Quarter in the mall on I-205, there was 4%. So at 11%, we feel we're about right where we should be. And the FAA and their project management oversight consultant are very happy with us basically staying within our draw timelines. So I'll stop there. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. I didn't do so well getting this back on schedule.
The graph would be helpful. I mean, I realize you're dealing with $250 million approximately, but to have some kind of numeric value on the side. Otherwise, it shows a trend, and it's very good to see the results so far. You're managing it very well. It'd be nice to have just what those values are on the side, if possible.
We try to do this on a qualitative basis, so I'm happy to send you the...
It's a good picture, just for some of those that very looks like myself, American.
Yeah, understood. We'll get you that information.
All right. No questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
We're going to move into the budget.
Yeah, so the main event, I think, and we have Beth coming right now. We'll do a tag team here. Union Beast, I think. What we wanted to do, we did just a very short presentation that really began to sort of summarize some of the key budget issues, and then also Beth will be presenting a response to the presentation of Opal at the last board meeting about the ideas today. So maybe if I could jump into this real quickly, I do always want to start with the good news about the budget, and there is some good news about the budget. We are adding service to deal with Fulton County reliability on a number of bus lines, the number 4, number 9, the 35, the 44, the 76, and the 90s and 94. So we are attempting to keep our service quality at a good level. We're also supporting the city in the opening of the East Side Streetcar Loop, and that's new service to the region, an important project that we've been partnering with the city on. In terms of staffing, some key investments that I think we're continuing to make, including pens, repair, and officers, 3 additional bus cleaners, 1 for each in every garage, and some additional light rail vehicle mechanics, which is dealing with our midlife overhaul of some of our light rail vehicles who are now approaching that midlife. So this has always been part of our plan to do this. And again, we're keeping strong safety program in place and the training efforts that you've been very kind to support us on in terms of support and training and recertification of operators and supervisors that will continue. And equipment, 54 new buses, 27 new lift vehicles. Will complete the installation this year of our new bus communication system, which includes new radios and new control panels in each of the buses. And we will install with that onboard ticket printers so that rather than the obscure tear-off go paper, we actually have a very clear ticket and communication to the customer about the transfer time that's available to them on the printer. So those are all, I think, good accomplishments. Just by way of basic revenue assumptions, we've gone through this, I think, before. Our underlying payroll tax growth rate built into this budget is 3.5%. I was perhaps a bit more optimistic at the first of this calendar year, but as the year went on, it became clear that we were in a slowing growth rate. Slow growth rate. The overall payroll tax resource grows by 5% because there's underlying funding in the rate that contributes to that. So that is one of our fundamental assumptions. When it comes to balancing the budget, we minimize service cuts. And so there are a number of what I would call efficiencies that will be cuts to some, there's no question. We'll be reconfiguring 15 different bus routes, mostly to try to eliminate duplication of service on the same street. That's occurring in Washington County, it's occurring in Northwest Portland. And we're looking for ways, we have found, I believe, ways to relocate the service in a more efficient way, but still provide service and coverage to those neighborhoods that get service. We also will be cutting low ridership trips on 9 bus lines, including my bus line of the number 43. And that will save about $1.1 million a year. The budget does include a fare increase, and it includes moving to a flat fare of $2.50. And it jettisons our 30-year-old zone system. It also is, I think, an important first step toward our electronic fare system. One of the characteristics of this flat fare would be that we actually are not changing the price of our day pass. So our day pass will be $5. It will be 2 times the round trip fare. So we hope that our customers will take advantage of that by buying a round trip in the morning, getting the day pass in return, and then that allows free use of the system for the rest of the day. And so we'll be working to make sure that that opportunity for our customers is well communicated. And we've gone through a number of the reasons for this. I won't dwell on that much longer in any of these important questions. We're not, again, changing our transfer policy. It remains 2 hours, but we will be phasing in the ticket printers, and so the ordinance allows us to do that as we install those and make those printers available for customers. Some other, I think, things of note are honored citizen fares remain at $1 for a 2-hour ticket. For the first time, though, we actually are offering a day pass for honored citizens at twice the price. And so I think also some advantages to that. We're developing a convention pass program and have been very successful in getting our partners on this. We've been working with Metro, Travel Portland, the city, and Multnomah County, and this will be funded through transient lodging taxes, local general hotel taxes. And we are entering into an agreement with these entities to provide that. Basically, it provides for convention center attendees 3 days of transit of a day pass, essentially. So not only do they have the ability to transfer free between a hotel and the convention center, they'll also be able to use the system for other, to access other venues, like the Oregon Zoo or the National Center, served well by the system. The budget does still include the notion that we will change the lift boundaries. Again, this doesn't require board action, the general manager can do this, but I was going to do it in conjunction consideration of all of this. We do recognize the CATS did not recommend this action as an overall body, but again, the justification and rationale for this, I think, is strong in that recall that for every one senior or person with disability on the lift system, they're on the fixed route system. And what we're trying to do is preserve the fixed route system service to be as effective and as high quality as possible. And we tried to incent that for our lift customers by keeping the honor citizen fare at the low level of $1. This boundary adjustment will save about $400,000 on an annual basis.
Give me a map of that. I still haven't understood the difference of the boundaries.
Okay, we actually may have some maps. I don't know if we can get copies.
Okay, great.
That would be good.
They have two other boards never seen? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing that we are working hard on developing and putting in place is a low-income fare mitigation program. And this will broaden the organization that we currently offer a discount to. We actually have, the way that we formulate this is that these organizations become outlets for Trimet, and we give them a commission of 5% currently. We would grow that commission to 10%, and then typically they would pass that savings on to the clients of the organization. So what we are doing is looking to broaden the number of organizations that are available as outlets for this fare, and also beginning to grow the program at a substantial level over the next year to deal with those that have the most need related to income issues.
If everything went well, what could something like that be?
By September. And I do believe that there's something that will, we'll start with our the current organizations that we work with, and then begin to grow that over time. I think that they'll catch on very quickly.
How many might that serve? How many folks do you think?
That's an excellent question, and I don't know. Let's see, John, here. Currently, we sell about, I can remember.
What was it for the, how much do we sell
for the,
for low income, like Multnomah County?
Well, we, over 3 million a year
Yeah.
in passes and tickets to
So
social
5%
services.
level, we sell over 3 million a year, so my hope is that that will go up. Now that, so if you think about our costs, it's 5% of that 3 million, the
Is it 3 million passes or $3 million?
dollars.
Dollars.
Yeah.
So my assumption is that will at least double in terms of the volume.
So we're aiding the community by approximately $150,000, which has an impact on the budget. Is that included in the budget analysis? Is that $150,000 offset?
Yeah, I would like to make sure that, traditionally we sometimes use the same organizations to do this kind of work, and I think it's really important to look at what that boundary is, and other new organizations that are impacting the community.
We really want to consult with you, board member Zaragoza, on this, because your knowledge of these organizations would be very helpful to us. And I think one of the things we are definitely interested in doing that. And right now, as I look at the list of organizations that participate, I can't find the strong rationale or guidance and criteria. So we need to do a better job of that.
So could we create our own criteria, whether it's eligible?
Yes. And that's what we're
What is the third bullet?
I'm going too fast.
Just explain that a little more.
Sure. Right now, we have an honored citizen photo ID pass that's available for residents of downtown. And so it's a senior or a person with a disability who lives in the downtown core can access the pass. And right now, they are able to use it for bus service. What we want to do is make sure that the availability of that pass is expanded, and so that, for example, we fit that criteria throughout the downtown core will be able to sign up for it, have a ticket office downtown Times Square. And they'll be able to use that then for, really as a substitute for your free rail zone. And so it's a mitigation for the loss of free rail zone.
So the word extend isn't a geographic extension, it's a promotion
Right.
of its availability.
Right. And currently, it doesn't apply to Max currently because of it.
Because it's pretty bad.
There are a couple of issues that I wanted to just sort of note, and there's a lot more that you may want to raise or come into. One is premium service.